the mother of God spoke to her son, saying, "My son, look how your bride is crying, because you have few friends and many enemies." The son answered, "It is written, that the sons of the kingdom will be cast out, and will not inherit the kingdom." It is likewise written, that a certain queen came from far away, to see the riches of Solomon and to hear his wisdom. When she saw it all, she was breathless from sheer amazement. The people of his kingdom, however, paid no attention to his wisdom, nor admired his riches. I'm prefigured by Solomon, although I'm far richer and wiser than Solomon was, inasmuch as all wisdom comes from me and anyone who is wise gets his wisdom from me. My riches are eternal life and indescribable glory. I promised and offered these goods to Christians as to my own children, in order that they might possess them forever, if they imitated me, and believed in my words. But they pay no attention to my wisdom. They hold my deeds and my promises in scorn and regard my riches as worthless. What shall I do with them then? Surely, if the sons do not want their inheritance, then strangers, that is, pagans, will receive it. Like that foreign queen, whom I take to represent faithful souls, they will come, and admire the wealth of my glory and charity, so much so that they will fall away from their spirit of infidelity, and be filled with my spirit. What, then, shall I do with the sons of the kingdom? I will deal with them in the manner of a skillful potter who, when he observes that the first object he has made out of clay is neither beautiful nor usable, throws it to the earth and crushes it. I will deal with Christians in the same way. Although they ought to be mine, since I formed them in my image, and redeemed them with my blood, they have turned out to be pitiably deformed. Therefore, they will be trampled down like earth, and thrown into hell. The Lord's words in the presence of the bride concerning his own majesty, and a wonderful parable comparing Christ to David, while Jews, bad Christians, and pagans are compared to David's 3 sons, and about how the church subsists in the 7 sacraments. Chapter 5. I'm God, not made of stone or wood, nor created by another, but the creator of the universe, abiding without beginning or end. I'm he who came into the Virgin, and was with the Virgin without losing my divinity. Through my human nature I was in the Virgin, while still retaining my divine nature, and I'm that same person who, through my divine nature, continued to rule over heaven and earth together with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Through my spirit I set the Virgin on fire, not in the sense that the spirit that set her on fire was something separate from me, but the spirit that set her on fire was the same one who was in the Father and in me, the Son, just as the Father and the Son were in him, these 3 being one God, not 3 gods. I'm like King David who had 3 sons. One of them was called Absalom, and he sought the life of his father. The second, Adonijah, sought his father's kingdom. The third son, Solomon, obtained the kingdom. The first son denotes the Jews. They are the people who sought my life and death, and scorned my counsel. Consequently, now that their acquittal is known, I can say what David said upon the death of his son, my son, Absalom, that is, O my Jewish children, where is your longing and expectation now? O my children, what will be your end now? I felt compassion for you, because you longed for me to come for me whom you learned from many signs had come, and because you longed for quickly fading glory, all of which now has faded. But I feel greater compassion for you now, like David repeating those first words over and over, because I see that you will end in a wretched death. Therefore, again like David, I say with all my love, my son, who will let me die in your stead? David knew well that he could not bring back his dead son by dying himself, but, in order to show his deep fatherly affection and the eager yearning of his will, even though he knew it was impossible, he was prepared to die in the place of his son. In the same way, I now say, O my Jewish children, although you had ill will toward me, and did as much as you could against me, if it were possible, and if my father allowed it, I would willingly die once again for you, for I take pity on the misery you have brought upon yourselves as required by justice. I told you what was to be done by my words, and showed you by my example. I went ahead of you like a hen protecting you with wings of love, but you spurned it all. Therefore, all the things that you longed for have fled away. Your end is misery and all your labor wasted. Bad Christians are denoted by David's second son who sinned against his father in his old age. He reasoned with himself in this way, my father is an old man, and failing in strength. If I say anything wrong to him, he does not respond. If I do anything against him, he does not avenge himself. If I assail him, he endures it patiently. Therefore, I will do what I want. With some of his father David's servants, he went up to a grove of few trees, in order to play the king. But when the wisdom and intention of his father became evident, he changed his plan and those who were with him fell into discredit. This is what Christians are doing to me now. They think to themselves, God's signs and decisions are not as manifest now as they were before. We can say what we like, since he is merciful and pays no attention. Let us do as we please, since he gives way easily. They have no faith in my power, as if I were weaker now, in accomplishing my will than I was before. They imagine my love to be less, as if I'm no longer as willing to have mercy on them as on their fathers. They also think that my judgment is a thing to be laughed at, and that my justice is meaningless. Therefore, they too go up to a grove with some of David's servants, in order to play the king with presumption. What does this grove of few trees denote, if not the Holy Church subsisting through the 7 sacraments as through just a few trees? They enter into this church along with some of David's servants, that is, with a few good works, in order to gain God's kingdom with presumption. They do a modest number of good works, confident that thereby, no matter what state of sin they are in, or whatever sins they have committed, they can still gain the kingdom of heaven, as if by hereditary right. David's son wanted to obtain the kingdom against David's will, but was driven away in disgrace, inasmuch as both he and his ambition were unjust, and the kingdom was given to a better and wiser man. In the same way, these people will also be driven away from my kingdom. It will be given to those who do the will of David, since only a person who has charity can obtain my kingdom. Only a person who is pure, and is led by my heart can approach me who am the most pure of all. Solomon was the third son of David. He represents the pagans. When Bathsheba heard that someone other than Solomon, whom David had promised, would be king after him, had been elected by certain persons, she went to David and said, "My lord, you swore to me that Solomon would be king after you. Now, however, someone else has been elected. If this is the case, and it goes on in this way, I will end up being sentenced to the fire as an adulteress and my son will be regarded as illegitimate." When David heard this, he stood up and said, "I swear to God, that Solomon will sit on my throne, and be king after me." He then ordered his servants to set Solomon on the throne, and proclaim as king the man of David's choice. They carried out the orders of their lord, and raised up Solomon to great power, and all those who had given their vote to his brother, were scattered and reduced to servitude. This Bathsheba, who would have been accounted an adulteress had another king been elected, stands for nothing other than the faith of the pagans. No kind of adultery is worse than selling oneself into prostitution away from God, and from the true faith, and believing in a God other than the creator of universe. Just as Bathsheba did, some of the Gentiles come to me with humble and contrite hearts, saying, "Lord, you promised that in the future we would be Christians. Carry out your promise. If another king, if another faith other than yours should gain the ascendancy over us, if you remove yourself from us, we will burn in misery and die like an adulteress who has taken an adulterer instead of a lawful husband. Besides, although you live forever, nevertheless, you will die to us, and we to you in the sense that you will remove your grace from our hearts, and we will set ourselves up against you due to our lack of faith. Therefore, fulfill your promise, and strengthen our weakness, and enlighten our darkness. If you delay, if you remove yourself from us, we will perish. Having heard this, I will stand up like David through my grace and mercy. I swear by my divine nature, which is joined to my humanity, and by my human nature, which is in my spirit, and by my spirit, which is in my divine and human natures, these three being not three gods but one God, that I will fulfill my promise. I will send my friends, to bring my son Solomon, that is, the pagans, into the grove, that is, into the church, which subsists through the 7 sacraments as through 7 trees, namely baptism, penance, the anointment of confirmation, the sacrament of the altar, and of the priesthood, matrimony, and extreme unction. They will take their rest upon my throne, that is, in the true faith of the Holy Church. Moreover, the bad Christians will become their servants. The former will find their joy in an everlasting heritage, and in the sweet nourishment that I will prepare for them. The latter, however, will groan in the misery that will begin for them in the present and last forever. And so, since it is still the time for vigilance, may my friends not fall asleep, may they not grow weary, for a glorious reward awaits their toil. The son's words in the presence of the bride concerning a king standing on a battlefield with friends to his right and enemies to his left, and about how the king represents Christ who has Christians to the right and pagans to the left, and about how the Christians are rejected, and he sends his preachers to the pagans. Chapter 6. The son said, I'm like a king standing in a battlefield with friends standing to his right and enemies to his left. The voice of someone shouting came to those who stood on the right where everyone was well armed. Their helmets were fastened, and their faces were turned to their Lord. The voice shouted to them, turn to me and trust me. I have gold to give you. When they heard this, they turned toward him. The voice spoke a second time to those who had turned around, if you want to see the gold, unfasten your helmets, and if you want to keep it, I will fasten your helmets on again as I wish. When they assented, he fastened their helmets on back to front. The result was that the front part with the apertures to see through was at the back of their heads, while the helmet's back part covered their eyes, so that they were unable to see. Shouting like this, he led them after him like blind men. When this had been done, some of the king's friends reported to their lord that his enemies had tricked his men. He said to his friends, go out among them and cry out, unfasten your helmets, and see how you have been deceived. Turn back to me, and I will welcome you in peace. They did not want to listen, but regarded it as mockery. The servants heard this, and reported it to their lord. He said, well then, since they have scorned me, go quickly toward the left-hand side, and tell those who stand on the left these 3 things, the way that leads you to life, has been prepared for you. The gate is open. And the Lord himself wants to come to meet you with peace. Believe therefore firmly, that the way has been prepared. Have a steadfast hope, that the gate is open and his words are true. Go to meet the Lord with love, and he will welcome you with love, and peace and lead you to everlasting peace. When they heard the messenger's words, they believed in them, and were welcomed in peace. I'm that king. I had Christians to my right, since I had prepared an eternal reward for them. Their helmets were fastened, and their faces were turned toward me, so long as they wholly intended to do my will, to obey my commandments, and so long as all their desire aimed at heaven. By and by the devil's voice, that is, pride, sounded in the world, and showed them worldly riches and carnal pleasure. They turned toward it, by yielding their assent and desires to pride. Because of pride, they took off their helmets, by putting their desires into effect, and preferring temporal to spiritual goods. Now that they have put aside the helmets of God's will, and the weapons of virtue, pride has got such a hold of them, and so bound them to itself, that they are only too happy to go on sinning right to the end, and would be glad to live forever, provided they could sin forever. Pride has so blinded them, that the apertures of the helmets through which they should be able to see, are at the back of their heads, and in front of them is darkness. What do these apertures in the helmets represent if not the consideration of the future and the provident circumspection of present realities? Through the first aperture, they should see the delight of future rewards and the horrors of future punishments as well as the awful sentence of God. Through the second aperture, they should see God's commandments and prohibitions, also how much they may have transgressed God's commandments, and how they should improve. But these apertures are at the back of the head where nothing can be seen, which means that the consideration of heavenly realities has fallen into disregard. Their love for God has grown cold, while their love for the world is considered with delight, and embraced in such a way, that it leads them like a well-oiled wheel with a rid will. However, seeing me dishonored, and souls falling away, and the devil gaining control, my friends cry out daily to me in their prayers for them. Their prayers have reached heaven, and come to my hearing. Moved by their prayers, I have daily sent my preachers to these people, and shown them signs, and increased my graces to them. But, in their scorn for it all, they have piled sin upon sin. Therefore, I shall now say to my servants, and I shall put my words most assuredly into effect, my servants, go to the left-hand side, that is, to the pagans, and say, the Lord of heaven and the creator of the universe would have the following said to you, the way of heaven is open for you. Have the will to enter it with a firm faith. The gate of heaven stands open for you. Hope firmly and you will enter through it. The King of heaven and the Lord of angels will personally come out to meet you and give you everlasting peace and blessing. Go out to meet him and receive him with the faith he has revealed to you and that has made ready the way to heaven. Receive him with the hope by which you hope, for he himself has the intention of giving you the kingdom. Love him with your whole heart, and put your love into practice, and you will enter through the gates of God from which those Christians were thrust away who did not want to enter them, and who made themselves unworthy by their own deeds. By my truth I declare to you, that I will put my words into practice, and will not forget them. I will receive you as my children and I will be your father, I, whom Christians have held in scornful scorn. You then, my friends, who are in the world, go forth without fear and shout out loud, announce my will to them, and help them to carry it out. I will be in your hearts, and in your words. I will be your guide in life and your savior in death. I will not abandon you. Go forth boldly, the more the toil, the greater the glory. I can do all things in a single instant, and with a single word, but I want your reward, to grow through your own efforts and my glory, to grow through your bravery. Do not be surprised at what I say. If the wisest man in the world could count up how many souls fall into hell each day, they would outnumber the sands of the sea or the pebbles on the shore. This is a matter of justice, because these souls have separated themselves from their Lord and God. I'm saying this, so that the devil's numbers may decrease, and the danger become known, and my army be filled up. If only they would listen and come to their senses. Jesus Christ speaks to the bride and compares his divine nature to a crown, and uses Peter and Paul to symbolize the clerical and the lay state, and about the ways of dealing with enemies, and about the qualities that knights in the world should have. Chapter 7. The Son spoke to the bride, saying, I'm king of the crown. Do you know why I said king of the crown? Because my divine nature was, and will be and is without beginning or end. My divine nature is aptly likened to a crown, because a crown has neither starting point nor end. Just as a crown is reserved for the future king in a kingdom, so too my divine nature was reserved for my human nature to be its crown. I had two servants. One was a priest, the other a layman. The first was Peter, who had a priestly office, while Paul was, as it were, a layman. Peter was bound in marriage, but when he saw that his marriage was not consistent with his priestly office, and considering that his upright intention might be endangered by a lack of continence, he separated himself from the otherwise licit marriage, in which he divorced himself from his wife's bed, and he devoted himself to me wholeheartedly. Paul, however, did observe celibacy, and kept himself unstained by the marriage bed. See what great love I had for these two. I gave the keys of heaven to Peter, so that whatever he bound, or loosed on earth might be bound, or loosed in heaven. I allowed Paul to become like Peter in glory and honor. As they were equals together on earth, so now they are united in everlasting glory in heaven and glorified together. However, although I mention these two expressly by name, by and through them, I mean to denote other friends of mine as well. In similar fashion, under the earlier covenant, I used to speak to Israel, as if I were addressing just one person, although I meant to designate the entire people of Israel by that one name. In the same way now, using these two men, I mean to denote the multitude of those whom I have filled with my glory and love. With the passage of time, evils began to multiply, and the flesh began to grow weaker and to be more than usually prone to evil. Therefore, I set up norms for each of the two, that is, for the clergy and laity, represented here by Peter and Paul. In my mercy I decided to allow the clergy to own a moderate amount of church property for their bodily needs in order that they might grow more fervent and constant in serving me. I also allowed the laity to join in marriage according to the rites of the church. Among the priests there was a certain good man who thought to himself, the flesh drags me toward base pleasure, the world drags me toward harmful sights, while the devil sets various traps to get me to sin. Therefore, in order not to be ensnared by carnal pleasure, I will observe moderation in all my actions. I will be moderate in my rest and recreation. I will dedicate the proper time to work and prayer and restrain my carnal appetites through fasting. Second, in order that the world may not drag me away from the love of God, I will give up all worldly things, for they are all perishable. It is safer to follow Christ in poverty. Third, in order not to be deceived by the devil who is always showing us falsehoods instead of the truth, I will submit myself to the rule and obedience of another, and I will reject all selfishness, and show that I'm ready to undertake whatever is commanded me by the other person. This man was the first to establish a monastic rule. He persevered in it in praiseworthy fashion, and left his life as an example, to be imitated by others. For a time the class of the laity was well organized. Some of them tilled the soil and bravely persevered in working the land. Others sailed on ships and carried merchandise to other regions, so that the resources of one region supplied the needs of another. Others were diligent craftsmen and artisans. Among these were the defenders of my church, who are now called knights. They took up arms as avengers of the Holy Church, in order to do battle against her enemies. There appeared among them a good man and friend of mine who thought to himself, I do not till the soil as a farmer. I do not toil on the seas as a merchant. I do not work with my hands as a skilled craftsman. What, then, can I do, or with what works can I please my God? I'm not energetic enough in the service of the church. My body is too soft and weak to bear physical injuries, my hands lack the force to strike down enemies, and my mind grows uneasy in pondering the things of heaven. What can I do then? I know what I can do. I will go and bind myself by a stable oath to a secular prince, swearing to defend the faith of the Holy Church with my strength and with my blood, that friend of mine went to the prince and said, "My lord, I am one of the defenders of the church. My body is all too weak to bear physical injuries, my hands lack the force to strike down others, my mind is unstable when it comes to thinking about and carrying out what is good, my self-will is what pleases me, and my need for rest does not let me take a strong stance for the house of God. I bind myself therefore with a public oath of obedience to the Holy Church and to you, O Prince, swearing to defend her all the days of my life in order that, although my mind and will may be lukewarm with respect to the struggle, I can be held and compelled to toil, because of my oath." The prince answered him, "I will go with you to the house of the Lord, and be a witness to your oath and your promise." Both of them came up to my altar, and my friend genuflected and said, "I'm too weak of body to bear physical injuries, my self-will is all too pleasing to me, my hands are too lukewarm when it comes to striking blows. Therefore, I now pledge obedience to God and to you, my chief, binding myself by an oath, to defend the Holy Church against her enemies, to comfort the friends of God, to do good to widows, orphans, and God's faithful, and never to do anything contrary to God's church or the faith. Moreover, I will submit myself to your correction, if I should happen to err, in order that, bound by obedience, I might fear sin and selfishness all the more, and apply myself more fervently and readily to carrying out God's will, and your own will, knowing myself to be only the more worthy of condemnation and contempt, if I should presume to violate obedience, and transgress your commands." After this profession had been made at my altar, the prince wisely decided that the man should dress differently than other laymen as a sign of his self-renouncement, and as a reminder to him that he had a superior to whom he had to submit. The prince also placed a sword in his hand, saying, "This sword is for you to use to threaten and slay the enemies of God." He placed a shield on his arm, saying, "Defend yourself with this shield against the missiles of the enemy and patiently endure whatever is thrown against it. May you sooner see it shattered than run away from battle." In the presence of my priest who was listening, my friend made the firm promise to observe all of this. When he had made his promise, the priest gave him my body to provide him strength and fortitude so that, once united with me through my body, my friend might never be separated from me. Such was my friend George as well as many others. Such too should the knights be. They should get to hold their title as a result of merit and to wear their knightly attire as a result of their actions in defense of the holy faith. Hear how my enemies are now going against the earlier deeds of my friends. My friends used to enter the monastery out of their wise reverence and love for God. But those who are in monasteries nowadays go out into the world because of pride and greed, following self-will, fulfilling the pleasure of their bodies. Justice demands that people who die in such a disposition should not experience the joy of heaven, but rather obtain the endless punishment of hell. Know too, that the cloistered monks who are forced against their will to become prelates out of love for God are not to be counted among their number. The knights who used to bear my arms were ready to lay down their lives for justice and shed their blood for the sake of the holy faith, bringing justice to the needy, putting down and humbling the doers of evil. But hear how they have now been corrupted. Now they would rather die in battle for the sake of pride, greed, and envy at the promptings of the devil instead of living after my commandments, and obtaining eternal joy. Just wages will therefore be dealt out at the judgment to all the people who die in such a disposition, and their souls will be yoked to the devil forever. But the knights who serve me will receive their due wages in the heavenly host forever. I, Jesus Christ, true God and man, one with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever, have said this. Christ's words to the bride about a certain knight's desertion from the true army, that is, from humility, obedience, patience, faith, etc., to the false one, that is, to the opposing vices, pride, etc., and the description of his condemnation, and about how one can meet with condemnation, because of an evil, will just as much as, because of evil deeds. Chapter 8. I'm the true Lord. There is no other Lord greater than I. There was no Lord before me, nor will there be any after me. All lordship comes from me and through me. This is why I'm the true Lord, and why no one but I alone can truly be called Lord, for all power comes from me. I was telling you earlier that I had 2 servants, one of whom manfully took up a praiseworthy way of life, and kept at it manfully to the end. Countless others followed him in that same way of knightly service. I will now tell you about the first man to desert the profession of knighthood as instituted by my friend. I will not tell you his name, because you do not know him by name, but I will disclose his purpose and desire. A man who wanted to become a knight came to my sanctuary. When he went in, he heard a voice. 3 things are necessary if you want